The midday sun beat down relentlessly, casting harsh rays that bounced off the shiny metals and patches adorning Sergeant Tim Chambers' crisp uniform. Sweat beaded on his forehead, tracing rivulets down his determined face, but he paid it no mind. His eyes were fixed, unwavering, and his right arm was raised in a solemn salute. For 15 minutes, then 30, then 60, he stood unmoved. This was not just a gesture of respect, it was a tribute rooted in deep pain and unwavering loyalty. Each moment of his salute honored fallen comrades, lives cut short but never forgotten. Around him, the crowd murmured in hushed tones, some watching in awe, others moved to tears. The 3-hour mark loomed, and fatigue threatened to overtake him. The strain on his injured leg, a wound that had left him with a permanent limp, was visible, and his body trembled under the physical toll. But giving up was not an option. To Sergeant Chambers, the salute represented more than just memory. It was a promise to hold up the dignity of those who served, those who had given their lives for their country. Every minute that passed was another testament to his dedication, resilience, and refusal to surrender to pain. Then a low rumble echoed in the distance, growing louder until it became unmistakable, the roar of motorcycle engines. A wave of tension swept over the crowd. The group approaching had a reputation, a notorious gang of bikers known to disrupt public ceremonies and Memorial Day events, stirring trouble wherever they went. People whispered nervously, casting worried glances toward the lone Marine, wondering if he would be harassed or even harmed. The bikers drew closer, forming a thunderous line as they parked their motorcycles. With leather vests emblazoned with fierce insignias, the gang dismounted. Silence stretched taut across the scene, as though everyone collectively held their breath. Sergeant Chambers did not flinch. He remained standing, arm raised, eyes resolute. He had faced far greater dangers in life and would not be deterred from his mission. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the bikers, a grizzled man with a heavy beard and deep-set eyes, stepped forward. He moved with purpose, but there was no malice in his stride. Instead, he came to a halt before the Marine, removed his weathered cap, and placed it over his heart. The other bikers followed suit, one by one. Together, they stood in solidarity with Chambers, a protective circle around him, shielding him from the sun and offering silent support. They, too, knew the cost of service. Many among them were veterans themselves, bound by their own scars and stories of brotherhood. The crowd's tension melted into admiration, and a ripple of applause spread, growing louder and louder. Tears streamed down faces as they watched this moment of unity, strength, and unspoken respect unfold. For hours, the bikers remained, standing vigil alongside Sergeant Chambers. His salute never wavered, his mission never faltered, but now, he was no longer alone. When the tribute ended, Sergeant Chambers finally lowered his arm. Pain coursed through him, but he stood tall, his gaze meeting that of the grizzled biker who had first stepped forward. There were no words exchanged, none were needed. In that moment, honor and respect transcended all divides. Together, they saluted the past and strengthened the bonds of a community that would continue to honor its heroes. As the crowd's applause swelled and gradually subsided, people began approaching Sergeant Tim Chambers and the bikers with words of thanks, tears of gratitude shining in their eyes. Children clutched miniature flags tightly, watching why died as adults clasped the Marines' hands, their voices trembling with emotion. "Thank you for your service," they repeated, their words echoing through the street like a heartfelt mantra. It was a tribute not just to him, but to the millions who had served, those whose names were etched into stone, and those who continued to carry the weight of duty long after leaving the battlefield. Sergeant Chambers, though physically exhausted, felt a surge of strength from the crowd's presence and the unexpected support of his newfound allies. The bikers, no longer seen as troublemakers, shared their own stories of service and sacrifice. Some bore tattoos of fallen comrades, names forever inked into their skin as a permanent memorial. Others carried dog tags that once belonged to brothers in arms, a constant reminder of lives lost but never forgotten. One biker in particular, The grizzled man who had first stepped forward introduced himself as Jack. He had served decades ago in a war that many sought to forget. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, Jack and Sergeant Chambers exchanged stories of battles fought and memories both bitter and cherished. Though their service spanned different generations, the bond between them was instantaneous and spoken yet understood. After a while, Jack motioned to the rows of motorcycles parked along the street. "We ride for them," he said, his voice gravelly but resolute. "Those who can't ride anymore. Those whose journeys ended too soon." He glanced at the sea of faces surrounding them, his gaze unwavering. "You stood alone for them. Now you'll never have to again." Moved beyond words, Sergeant Chambers nodded. A shared silence fell between them, one that spoke louder than any words could. It was a promise of pact to continue honoring those who sacrificed everything, to never let their memory fade. As dusk approached, the bikers extended an invitation. They wanted Sergeant Chambers to join them on a memorial ride through the town. It was their tradition, a symbolic journey to remind everyone of the cost of freedom and to pay homage to the fallen. Though physically spent, the Marine agreed without hesitation. His heart, too, carried the weight of remembrance. The group prepared for their ride. The rumble of engines filled the air once more, but this time it carried a different energy, one of unity, respect, and shared purpose. With Sergeant Chambers riding alongside them, they formed a procession, a roaring testament to the resilience of those who served and the strength found in brotherhood. Flags waved from the backs of motorcycles, and as they passed through streets lined with spectators, people waved and saluted, showing their appreciation. As they rode on, memories of fallen friends, the pain of loss, and the triumph of resilience blended into a single, powerful moment. The bikers and the Marine were no longer individuals with separate pasts. They were a living tribute, a testament to perseverance, honor, and the unbreakable bond of service. When they finally returned to the war memorial, night had fallen. The glow of candles and the soft hum of the crowd created an atmosphere of solemn reverence. Sergeant Chambers stepped off his borrowed bike, his injured leg stiff but steady. He saluted once more, this time surrounded by those who stood with him as family in spirit. The bikers joined, their hands on their hearts or raised in salutes of their own. The journey may have ended, but the mission had only just begun. Together, they pledged to keep honoring, remembering, and carrying the legacy of those who came before them. As they departed into the night, they left behind not just a moment etched into history, but a promise that would echo across time, that no hero would ever stand alone. In the days that followed, the memory of that extraordinary Memorial Day moment resonated throughout the community and beyond. News outlets picked up the story, recounting how a Marine with an indomitable spirit had stood alone in silent tribute, only to be joined by a group of bikers who transformed tension into solidarity. Social media lit up with images of the Marine and the bikers saluting side by side, their faces etched with determination, pride, and raw emotion. The tale spread like wildfire, becoming a symbol of unity and resilience in a divided world. Sergeant Chambers, who had returned to his routine of service work and veteran advocacy, found himself flooded with messages from people around the country, families of fallen soldiers, fellow veterans, and even civilians who had been moved by the story. Each note carried stories of their own, tales of loss and hope, of battles fought both on and off the battlefield. While humbled, he realized that his mission now extended beyond a single gesture of tribute. He needed to carry the momentum forward, to continue bridging the divide between those who had served and the communities they swore to protect. He reached out to Jack and the bikers, proposing an idea that took root from that powerful day. Together, they formed an initiative called the Guardians Ride, a cross-country journey that would bring veterans and civilians together, spreading a message of remembrance, unity, and support for those still healing from visible and invisible scars. The initiative would organize memorial rides, workshops on veteran mental health and reintegration, and programs for community education and outreach. The goal was clear: to honor the fallen by serving the living. The bikers embraced the idea wholeheartedly. Within weeks, word spread, and veterans from all walks of life and different branches of service signed up to join. Communities along the proposed routes rallied, offering food, lodging, and donations to support the cause. Each leg of the journey would bring new faces and new stories, weaving a tapestry of shared experiences that transcended differences. The first leg of the Guardians' ride began on a crisp autumn morning. The roar of motorcycles filled the air, accompanied by flags fluttering in the wind, American flags, POW, MIA flags, and flags representing different branches of the military. Families and supporters lined the streets to watch the convoy pass. Some waved, others saluted, and many shed quiet tears as they watched veterans, young and old, riding side by side. As the journey progressed, the group made stops at memorials, veterans' homes, hospitals, and schools. They spoke of courage and sacrifice, of the struggles of returning home, and of the enduring strength of the human spirit. Sergeant Chambers often took center stage, sharing the story of his 3-hour salute and the unexpected bond forged with a group of bikers. But he made it clear, this was not just his story, it belonged to every veteran who had ever served, to every family who had ever grieved, and to every civilian who sought to understand. One memorable stop along the journey took them to a small town where a Gold Star family awaited. The parents of a fallen soldier stood in the crowd, clutching a framed photograph of their son. As the riders approached, Sergeant Chambers dismounted and walked over. He knelt before them, his gaze meeting theirs, and spoke quietly. There were no grand speeches, only words meant for their ears. The bikers formed a protective ring around them, a silent gesture of respect and support. The family's tears fell freely, and many in the crowd joined them, moved by the profound display of compassion and unity. As the Guardians' ride traveled further, the bikers, many of whom had once been seen as troublemakers or outsiders, were embraced as protectors and allies. They shared their own struggles with PTSD, addiction, and reintegration, breaking down barriers of judgment and misunderstanding. In turn, communities listened and offered support, transforming perceptions and fostering empathy. Months later, as the ride drew to a close, Sergeant Chambers and the bikers returned to the place where it had all begun, the war memorial where he had once stood alone in salute. This time, thousands gathered, veterans, families, civilians, and even officials. Together, they stood as one. As the crowd fell silent, Chambers raised his arm once more, his salute unwavering, but now supported by countless others. The journey had ended, but the mission continued. The Guardians' ride had become more than just a ride, it was a movement that reminded everyone of the power of resilience, unity, and the enduring spirit of those who serve. It was a reminder that in honoring the past, they had found a way to strengthen the present and pave the way for a better future. And as the sun set on that day, it cast its golden light over a sea of faces, each carrying a piece of the legacy that would never be forgotten. The sun dipped low on the horizon as Sergeant Chambers lowered his arm, signaling the end of his salute. A wave of quiet reverence swept over the gathering, punctuated only by the distant rustle of flags and the steady rumble of engines as the bikers lined up in solidarity. There was a palpable sense that this was more than just a moment, it was a defining chapter in a story that would continue to unfold. In the following weeks, the impact of the Guardians' ride rippled across the nation. Stories of the movement spread from small-town newspapers to major media outlets, capturing the hearts and minds of people from all walks of life. Donations poured in to support the cause, from simple gestures like homemade meals for riders to significant contributions aimed at expanding their mission. The movement had become a beacon of hope for countless veterans struggling with isolation, trauma, and a sense of disconnection from society. One day, Chambers received a handwritten letter that stood out among the hundreds he had received. It was from a young boy named Ethan, whose father, a decorated veteran, had taken his own life the previous year. "I wish my dad could have been part of your ride," Ethan wrote. Maybe he wouldn't have felt so alone. The letter pierced Chambers' heart like a dagger. It was a stark reminder of why he had taken that 3-hour stand in the first place, why he continued to fight for those who can no longer fight for themselves. Determined to make a difference for people like Ethan, Chambers and his fellow riders doubled down on their efforts. They expanded their mission beyond the memorial rides, working to establish support networks in local communities across the country. They organized counseling services, partnered with mental health organizations, and built programs to help veterans transition back into civilian life. Bikers, veterans, families, and community leaders joined forces to create safe spaces where veterans could share their stories, find support, and heal. One of the most powerful initiatives they launched was a national mentorship program, pairing veterans with at-risk youth. The idea was simple yet profound. Those who had carried the weight of service would help guide those struggling to find their way. Veterans shared their experiences of hardship and resilience, while young people learned that strength didn't always mean facing battles alone. Slowly but surely, lives were changed. Hope returned to places where it had long been absent. At a rally in a bustling city park, Sergeant Chambers stood before a sea of faces: veterans, families, civilians, and countless others whose lives had been touched by the Guardian's ride. He stepped up to the microphone, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "When I stood in that street raising my arm for hours, I did it to honor the fallen. But I could never have imagined what would come after," he said, pausing to steady himself. "All of you showed me that we don't have to stand alone." At a rally in a bustling city park, Sergeant Chambers stood before a sea of faces: veterans, families, civilians, and countless others whose lives had been touched by the Guardian's ride. He stepped up to the microphone, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "When I stood in that street raising my arm for hours, I did it to honor the fallen. But I could never have imagined what would come after," he said, pausing to steady himself. "All of you showed me that we don't have to stand alone, that together we can carry each other through the darkness." The crowd erupted in applause, but Chambers raised a hand, signaling for quiet. "There's one more thing we need to do," he continued, his eyes scanning the sea of faces. "We need to make sure that no one ever feels forgotten or left behind. We need to keep building, keep writing, keep honoring together." As night fell, candles were lit across the park, a glowing tribute to the sacrifices made by so many. The flickering flames reflected in tear-filled eyes, illuminating a renewed sense of purpose. People stood shoulder to shoulder, united by a commitment to carry the torch of remembrance and hope. Over the next year, the Guardian's ride expanded internationally. Allied veterans from around the world joined their American counterparts, forging new bonds and exchanging stories of sacrifice, resilience, and unity. They rode through countries scarred by conflict, bringing messages of healing and support to places that often felt forgotten. It was not always easy. Some communities were weary, while others were burdened by their own divisions. But step by step, ride by ride, the movement grew stronger. On a windswept day at a mountaintop memorial overlooking a vast expanse of rolling hills, Chambers stood with Jack and a dozen other bikers, their faces lined with years of experience and pain overcome. The wind carried whispers of the past, the voices of comrades lost but never forgotten. They raised their hands in salute once more, a gesture that spoke of honor, respect, and an unbreakable commitment to the future. As the movement continued to spread its light, the faces of those lost, like Ethan's father and countless others, became the driving force behind every mile ridden and every story shared. The mission had evolved, but its heart remained the same: to ensure that no one stood alone in the fight for remembrance, healing, and a future where no one would be left behind. And in every salute, in every rumble of a motorcycle engine, in every hand clasped in unity, the legacy of that first 3-hour salute and the bikers who stood alongside him lived on, an enduring symbol of strength, hope, and the bonds that tie humanity together.